they thought, okay, wait a minute, they stood Hegel on his head, to use their words. And remember, Marx, I think he was writing 1840s, he died 1870s, I want to say. He predicted that the socialist revolution would happen soon in industrialized countries. But what happened early 20th century, it only happened in Russia, which was a backwards feudal country. So even in his own lifetime, he was way off. And then, of course, he's been wrong since. Hitler came to power in 33. He said, the Third Reich will last 1,000 years. It lasted a little over a decade. So again, it's like, what level of arrogance do you have to think I'll found this and it'll keep going for 1,000 years from now? I mean, who could predict even, I mean, a fraction of that time into the future, much less 1,000 years?
Yeah, so that's a sorry, that's a thing to think about.
Yeah.
Where even when people look at history, this is why I think we need a new form of storytelling, because I think as we grew up, like, this part of the reason why African religions aren't adopted by the rest of the world, where you have the Abrahamic religions have had a way to be adopted by different cultures and different people in all over the globe, in Asia and South America and Africa, that didn't have this history, where they completely accepted a white Jesus, a white Mary, because it was brought to them by the white people who had accepted something from the Jews and the Middle Easterns and the Semitic people and adopted that into their way. So that was more a global. It was explaining, containing more of what humans knew at that time, and I think we've left that now. Now, because when you look at history, people were like 6,000 years ago, when you actually read the Bible and you read the actual dates, and some people, many Christians, still think that it's like, no, the world's a lot longer.
Yeah.
How do people understand that billions of years, to come to understanding that for most of existence existing, humans haven't even existed? So how do people even grasp that, let alone to think in the future of the things that you might do? That it's a tough kind of thing. So it's kind of like, forget the foreseeable future. The unknowable past is another massive massive question. The foreseeable future is one thing. The unimaginable past is another thing. Like, how do you imagine existence before there was beings to imagine existence? Like, how do you even put that into some kind of understanding? That it's kind of a tough thing. And
but this is why Karl Popper was critical of Marx, Hegel, Plato, and he'd be critical of the SJWs today. It's historicism. It's the idea that history has a preordained goal that we're all collectively working towards, and that's where that expression "right side of history" comes from. The idea is anything working towards that is on the right side of history. Anything that's not is wrong. But that assumes that history has some preordained end goal that we can foresee and we're all working towards. That assumes you can predict history, and good luck with that.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out if he had children. Peter Marcuse, he had one child.
Yeah.
So what Peter Marcuse is about. So I guess that kind of tied him in a bit to that, because and I think that is one thing that I hope maybe somebody's studying already, to see the difference between world leaders and just people in positions of power that have kids versus don't. Now, there could be something. I wrote this article on my Substack about the relationship with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. I truly think Joe Biden loves his son.
Yeah.
And I think that does influence his way. And if he did influence him, I would consider him to be rather inhuman, rather not even inhuman, just rather unnatural.
Yeah.
Life forms in different ways. Different animals do it in different ways. Some abandoned, like relatively abandoned, but they still do something. They still even go through the process of, most animals will at least pick a most possible healthy female partner or male partner to reproduce with, and have those things. At least they won't just settle for whatever is there. They'll try to actually select. Even if they're not directly parenting, they will at least try to give their kids that advantage. Even those fish that just have like millions of, they're like, we're still going to at least decide somehow the best spawning pool area. So there is some aspect there. So I get that. And we talk about with monarchies, and some of the positives was, with the monarchies, some of the positives of that was that they were invested in keeping the country in a certain way because their kids were going to take over that country. Now you kind of wonder, like, is that really the same in the kind of sense? But that's kind of part of why I'm also thinking there's not going to be these massive wars, because most of the people still are very landlocked and locational.
Yeah.
But the people in power who would be able to have these wars, they're not landlocked. They're not really dedicated to the average top Chinese Communist Party member that would actually be able to control and start a world war. is has much less in common with your average Chinese person than with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
So why would he decide to fight Joe Biden and then go live back in China when he would rather be able to go back and forth? Like when China's going to bomb the West Coast, where in the West Coast are they going to bomb after they've sent 300,000 of their best and brightest kids to the West Coast, to different schools in the United States of America? Where are they going to bomb? Like, what's going on? So that's the kind of thing where I'm thinking where that's already there and established in a different way where you have different kind of relationships. But I would like to see the difference between people in power who don't have kids versus people in power who do have kids, like the different things, like you look at the Angela Merkels and things like that who don't. So that's with the foreseeable future type of thing. So I'm wondering if Peter Marcuse is the German-American lawyer, Marcuse's son, professor. He was born in 1928. So yeah, he was at least up and about while Marcuse was writing some of these things. Do you have anything to say also on that? There's one more thing I think I've taken some notes on here. Anything else?
No, that's it. I was going to move on.
Okay. So one more thing was here, just the end, the second phase of socialism, again, with the foreseeable future. If he was thinking 40, like, what do you think right now that foreseeable future has arrived? The bureaucratic says the workers would itself eliminate domination and exploitation. A bureaucratic welfare state would still be a state of repression of which would continue even into the second phase of socialism. I think that's most definitely a bureaucratic socialist, bureaucratic welfare state does exist in the United States of America and many of first world countries in the world. So that status has been achieved. But a second, when each is to receive, so coming even into where each is to receive according to his needs. You do live in a kind of demand economy in the United States of America and many places in the West, and many civilized, westernized cities. I don't want to say westernized anymore because now is Japan westernized? Is Tokyo westernized?
Some would argue, yes. Some would argue, yes, because technology, technology, clothing styles. If you go back far enough, when they had steamships and trains and things, that's
but then what would the equivalent of an easternized? Is there even a concept like an easternized city, or does it go back into where it's like I was saying, it's not the West is the best. It's just that the West has adopted the best ways of thinking from humans at the moment. So it's this when Eastern cities and African cities adopt certain ways of doing things, they're just adopting the best or the most prevalent ideas that humans have that they would have probably come to eventually if exposed to certain things. So anyway, I think we should have a separate talk on that. Just on that phrase.
Remember when we did the video on post-colonial series, they talked about the idea of Orientalism, the idea that the West is a dominant culture, so they're imposing their ideas on everyone, and that to become empowered, these colonized people are supposed to rediscover their culture, and that would make them self-actualized and happier and wealthier and all this. That's what they were saying. So there was no concept of, wait a minute, people in Southeast Asia somehow impose their culture elsewhere and Westerners are expunging it. It's more the West ruled everything else, so they're imposing their culture on all these countries, and that these people should sort of resurrect their old traditions and customs, and that's how they'll become self-actualized. And if you remember, there was sort of this split in that movement because there were postmodern versus modern critiques of this, but there were also people, I know there were some Indian scholars, for example, who said, look, we have to acknowledge that the West did give us a lot of good things. We can retain our culture, our values, all this, but let's not throw out technology, science, all this, because it's given us a lot of benefits too. But let's examine the laws and see, okay, are these laws that we want, or are these things that the British imposed on us? And I think Japan is interesting because Japan was never colonized, but they're sort of that best of both worlds where they still have samurai, they still have their food, all this, but at the same time, they realize, wait a minute, we need modern technology because that's how we're going to get ahead. So I think there's that whole dynamic.
And I think it's kind of a situation where, according to his needs, where don't we live in a world where different cultures and societies seem to take things from the general knowledge of humanity and adopt the things according to the needs of the people in power or the individuals who are in those societies. Like, yeah, we'll take this part of Christianity, we'll take this part of power grids, we'll take this part of this, but we'll still have a caste system. Okay? I guess that's according to your needs and your culture, you're going to do that. Yeah. But then the United States of America won't go and say, okay, there's some things in India, we'll take the caste system. It's like, no, we'll take the way like you guys work and your work ethic in certain places and establish certain working places, and then we'll figure that we have certain needs that you're able to provide. We'll do that. Like we were talking about earlier with China, the difference. I think I was listening to Dr. Victor Davis Hanson. He was having the Classes podcast, and he was talking about how the difference between that one thing that Donald Trump had done very specifically was he came out and he said, I recognize your territorial interests. You have interests in your territory, and I'm not going to come here and judge you and damn you for the things that you do in Russia and damn you for the things that you do in China. I'm going to be very quiet mostly when I talk about you on the public stage because we have our own issues. Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put United States at the primacy. I'm going to also have that territorialism, and then we're going to have the things that we can actually benefit from together. We'll do that, and we just won't touch much on those other things. Like, yes, we wouldn't do that to the United States of America, but if you're doing it there, that's not for you to say. And then China also during Trump's time was a little different, but then recently they just came out and I think they had that meeting in Alaska where they come out and saying like, look, Black Lives Matter. They actually mentioned Black Lives Matter with the top level diplomatic meeting was saying like, yeah, look, your country's racist. You're saying we have issues with the Uyghurs, but look, your country's racist. Look at the black people in your country. They're saying you're racist. So like, what are you telling us about? Like, so it's that kind of situation where that moralizing, where it's like, no, you take it according to your needs. And then a little on top of that is this according to his needs thing. Who actually practices that in their life?
Yeah.
But it's I need a living wage, and they say like I need you to give me something else to define this. Like, but they don't care about the needs of those other people. They want to judge the needs of the other people. Say you don't need that. How do you know that person doesn't need that? How do you know that person doesn't need his 50th pair of Jordans? Like, should I say like, no, I need 2 pairs? So I need you to, before you buy your 50th pair, you have 49. Instead of you buying that 50th, you have to give me that 50th. Why? Like who's to say that kind of situation? So who actually practices this? Because you can go out there. A lot of people have enough income to still stay alive and just go around and supply people's needs. But instead they want to depend on a state to go out and redistribute that instead of them doing it on their own.
You okay?
There's this little bug in here. I don't know if you hear it. Mosquito.
So I just had 2 comments on this. So it's interesting you bring that up about China, because I think the whataboutism, that expression actually started because of the Soviet Union, because we would criticize their human rights violations and they would say, well, what about slavery? What about segregation? All this. But it's I and others have been accused of whataboutism, but I make the point that if I criticize other people, I'm not justifying things here. Like people, that it was that point the other day about how what the woke say is evil about America. They act like it's somehow unique to America, and what's good about America is somehow common, when literally the opposite is true. And when they bring up slavery and I say, well, every country on earth had slavery, they say that's whataboutism. But I say, no, that doesn't fit the technical definition, because the definition would be if I used other countries had slaves as a way of deflecting from America, saying, well, other countries had slaves, so what? That would be whataboutism. I'm saying, yes, America had slaves, that was terrible, but so did everyone else. So by that logic, isn't everyone else terrible? And if the answer is no, why are you singling out America specifically? And it gives the impression there's some other underlying reason. And my other comment is about each according to his needs. That's the famous Marxist line about from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. My friend Mikhail is Russian, ironically. He says the simple question to ask on that is, what happens when the ability to provide each according to his needs exceeds the ability to do it? Like, people talk about Scandinavia and the healthcare, how great it is. Well, it's a small, wealthy country with very healthy people. We have all these issues here with obesity, diabetes, pre-existing conditions. They say tax the rich. Well, what's going to happen? The rich are just going to put their money in offshore accounts. They're going to pass on the cost in other ways. It's not like, again, there's no Smog or Scrooge McDuck pile of gold that we can just keep taking from indefinitely. It's these costs are a real thing. Trade-offs are a real thing. You're not going to get around this. Whatever genius is, whatever computer programs you put in place, you're not going to get around it. There's just no way.
Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. Peasants.
Peasants.
Okay. Okay.